just wrapped up having just some quick overviews from Anthony and Kelly on some of their projects. So great timing.
If you don't mind, Dave, catch your breath. I saw you running in. I'm going to do the old-fashioned intro here. Had it written out. Good afternoon, everybody. This is the 6th edition of Inspired People, Inspired Places in our 2nd season now. Most of the time, Chris Moeller would be standing in my shoes, but my name is John Ramser. I'm Chris's right hand at Orion Growth, and I'm filling in for him because he is in Texas right now at an event there with Purposeful Intent and some other folks. So one thing I want to do is thank Sarah Segrist and the whole Open Campus team for their continued guidance, their wayfinding, and the general goodwill. Their team is awesome. Please give them a round of applause if you want to hit F4. They do such a wonderful job of making everybody welcome here in Open Campus. We will be recording this session and posting the video to YouTube. There is also a robust chat during the session down here in the bottom left-hand corner. We'll look for topics there for our roundtable Q&A after Dave interviews Kelly and Anthony. So I'd like to present our guests, Kelly and Anthony, Kelly Colon and Anthony Magee. They've already made some introductions themselves, but today they will be discussing neurodiversity in the workplace. As an aside, I have particular interest in this topic. My 2nd oldest stepdaughter is neurodiverse. I've been in her life for 15 years now and seen her overcome the social obstacles of spectrum disorder and work hard to find her strengths. And in August, I dropped her off at Appalachian State University and really felt a sense of joy and accomplishment on her part, and just we'll savor that moment for a long time. So needless to say, I'm excited to hear Kelly and Anthony share their own stories and their expertise. Here's a brief intro, even though they've given their own. Kelly Colon is an adjunct professor in the Curtis L. Garrish School of Business at Endicott College and the founder of Elidex Consulting. Kelly's path has been profoundly shaped by her own neurodivergence and her role as a mother to 3 neurodivergent children. In addition to acting as an educational consultant and professor, she is an accomplished author with her debut novel, Life Interrupted, showcasing her passion for storytelling and its ability to capture the essence of the human condition. Now, Anthony Magee is the head of performance and insight at Xero and is the strategy advisor to the board of Young Minds Matter. He brings with him lived and learned experience of LGBTQ+ and issues affecting young people, living with registered neurodiversities and an unseen physical disability. Anthony brings a diverse perspective of mental health, and he is determined to speak out and drive positive change. So how about a round of applause for our experts, speakers today? F4. And I will hand it over to you, Dave. Very thankfully hand it over to you, Dave.
Yeah. Can I be heard? I just want to clarify. I'm on my wife's old computer. It's a Mac computer I used to play online poker on like 10 years ago. And I'm on the streaming client right now, which is the first time I've been on it.
You sound great, buddy.
You sound good.
Pushing F1 and shit, and it's not worked though. Anyway, this is different than I've ever done it. But thanks everybody for being here, and sorry for these hiccups. I randomly was supposed to come in here early just to give a video to Mike and Sarah for our 3rd question. I actually wanted to play a video. So I think once I get through my first little monologue and stuff, I'm going to drop you a private chat to give you that video. Okay?
Totally. I gotcha.
Okay, great. Well, welcome everybody. Anthony, it's great to meet you for the first time in a virtual world. Kelly, what's up, my girl?
How are you?
I'm good. and I hope you bring the unfiltered Kelly to this conversation.
Always.
Okay. All right. I'm just gonna kick us off. Okay. So growing up, I was the kid who always got kicked out of class. At report card time, all the negatives about me far outweighed the positives, and it was tough because I had a parent who cared a lot about outward appearance, and everybody just seemed to think I was kind of a shithead. I never really felt this way though. I cared a lot about people, and I wanted to be perceived well in school, just like everybody else. But there wasn't really a support system for me. It just sort of seemed like I was the problem that needed to get fixed. When I went to college, it was honestly a bit of a relief because I didn't have to go to class, and so I didn't. And while that experience was really hard, I found my own way to navigate it for the first time, to kind of navigate life for the first time. But what was really sort of happened to me in the college experience is I leaned into one of my obsessions, which was online poker. And funny enough, I'm on a computer that I might have even, I don't know if I used it back then, but soon after graduating, this is an old Mac. And I basically did that for 4 years in full tunnel vision. But by the time I graduated, I'd done well enough at that game that I could call it my full-time job. And it was really fucking relieving, if I'm honest, because corporate life felt like death to me. Skip over the whole poker thing. Eventually it ran its course, and I was kind of left with no option at the time but to get a real job. And I started as a research assistant at CBRE, doing admin tasks like making tour packages for office leasing agents. And it was really quite hellish for a personality that I hadn't quite fully understood at that time in my life. I knew I had to get through it though this time, and I couldn't really do it as much on my own terms like I did in college or when I played poker, because I had a boss. And one day my boss came up to me and asked me to go into a side room with her. As a total sidebar, there is like a side room office culture of toxicity that we could do like our own IP session on, and we could call it the side room, but I will leave that one for another time. So anyway, she pulls me into this side room and she lets me know that she's noticed that I've been leaving the office for hours at a time and that this wasn't acceptable. And me being somewhat defiant, and I never really understood arbitrary rules, I asked, I said, is there a problem with my work? Have any of the agents complained? To which she replied, no. And I kind of flippantly replied back to her, I said, then what's the problem? Now, I don't conduct myself that way anymore. And this whole journey and a bunch of stuff in my personal life has kind of made me suspect that I'm actually neurodiverse. I think I have ADHD, and I used to take drugs that get prescribed recreationally when I was playing poker, and they scared me so much that it's created this resistance layer for me to actually get formally diagnosed. And while I do have some very tangible struggles like inattentiveness, mood swings, and a lot of other stuff that perhaps medication could help me with, the hardest struggle that I've had have been the social ones. Feeling judged or misunderstood in the workplace and in my personal relationships, both for my sort of my perceived and my real shortcomings. Like, this has been kind of the weight that I've had to carry personally. And that's kind of how I want to kick this conversation off. I want to talk about the negative perceptions and biases that neurodiverse people experience in the workplace. According to the Natural Library of Medicine, it's estimated that 15 to 20% of the world's population is neurodiverse. That's a lot of people in our companies. So to kick it with Anthony, how big might the productivity, innovation, and social connectedness losses be because of the negative perceptions, misunderstandings, and ignorances that we experience in the workplace towards those that are neurodiverse? I want to start with Anthony.
Hi, Dave, and it's good to meet you as well. I just wanted to say as well, because I've gotten onto that, but I was going to say thanks for sharing that as well. I have had a very similar set of struggles, actually, or say struggles, a journey, and it's taken me a long time to trust medication because I self-medicated as well, Dave. So I just want to call that out. You're not alone. I don't know what the global view is, but I've been looking at some research for Young Minds Matter about this, actually. In the UK, mental health alone, and obviously, there's a whole piece around whether or not, neurodiversity or neurodivergence and mental health are, perceived, what the biases are between the two. But it's about $200 billion in the UK is estimated to be lost each year. You know, either undiagnosed, underrepresented, or, you know, unrecognized, or you know, ill-treated or not treated at all, mental health in the UK. And to put that into context of what people are doing in the UK, the government is putting an extra £2.1 billion a year in, which, you know, the numbers just don't add up with that. You'd never invest such a small amount. But that's that. Actually, I believe Microsoft did some research a while ago as well, during lockdown, that per employee, it's estimated there's about £7,000, or, you know, about $15,000 are lost each year in unproductive workforce, regardless of, you know, whether a registered neurodiversity or not, neurodivergent or not. So a lot of that is down to the fact that, you know, a neurodiverse workplace actually is good for everyone, regardless of, you know, whether or not, you know, they want to be or think they have a neurodiversity. So yeah, that's my view.
Awesome. And Kelly, I can't wait to hear from you. Give me like your more emotional stance on this whole thing, and maybe even some of your lived experience.
So, you know, it's interesting. I was diagnosed much later in life, and similar to you, Dave, when I was in high school, and even in middle school, I was never really a bad student, but I just felt like I didn't really belong there. I had a hard time sitting still. My feet were always tapping. I would be asked to, you know, get out of the classroom because I was being disruptive. But teachers liked me because I was personable, right? So I never really was, you know, never considered myself to be neurodivergent. And the irony of it is I have 3 neurodivergent children. My oldest is 26, and she was born a preemie and 10 weeks early, 3 pounds, 10 ounces. And that really was the first, I guess, exposure into services. And, you know, she needed all kinds of services, but it wasn't until my son was born, you know, 10 years later, and we sat at the doctor's office and they diagnosed him with AuDHD, sensory processing disorder, dyslexia. I mean, he has a very complex diagnosis. And the doctor turned to me and said, "This is genetic. And there's a large genetic component to this, and that likely he is representative of either you or my ex-husband and at the time." And I nearly melted down because here I thought his older 2 sisters and him all presented very similarly, but girls show up differently. And the maternal guilt I felt was crippling, to say the least. He was little. He was 5 at the time. And as we navigated his process, it became very clear that I too was neurodivergent. I had AuDHD, and that he likely got many of these things, you know, through me. And so there's a tremendous amount of parental guilt that I think happens. The other personal side of this is navigating, you know, the big feelings. Neurodivergent boys show up and present with symptoms radically different than girls. And so he had all of the big feelings. You know, we couldn't go places. He would lose his mind. Transitions were hard. And thus began this very long, complicated, honestly, battle with largely academic institutions that really did not have the ability to support my son socially, emotionally, or intellectually. And so it became really my life's personal mission to make sure that all 3 of my kids had the kinds of environments that they could be successful in. Now you flash forward in my career, and, you know, the flip side to this is personally, I'm supporting and trying to advocate getting services and providing education and trying desperately to get the things that my kids needed. But yet professionally, I was building environments that actually perpetuated the problem. I was building academic institutions. I was building corporate institutions. I was a facilities operations construction, and I'm actually building the exact environments that don't work for me or my kids. And so it became this sort of dichotomy between the two sides became increasingly more challenging, you know, as they got older.
Yeah, wow. Well, I really appreciate that you shared that more personal experience. I'm wondering if either of you are aware of the non-genetic factors that play into neurodiversity. And I mean, we're talking a lot right now about ADHD. Anthony, like I know in particular, ADHD can also come as a result of some childhood trauma stuff. Do you just have anything that you can share that's more environmental than the genetic aspect of things before we move into some other topics?
Yeah, absolutely. I echo what Kelly has said as well, because I've been diagnosed, but only in the last 18 months, and I've been looking back with a psychologist, and I'm sure I share this as well. You know, I'm still very privileged, really, that I have insurance through work that has enabled me to be able to get diagnosed later in life. But I've been looking back, and there is trauma that I hadn't even noticed. Well, I don't like calling it trauma, but everyone calls it trauma anyway. So I was bullied for the first 10 years of school, and for being different, for having more tantrums than any other child. Some of these things, with the assessments, especially in adulthood, you have to get your parents. I'm blessed enough that my parents were willing to do it, to say things that I hadn't heard before, because I'd obviously blocked it out or just didn't notice because I was too young. But I then, now looking back, realized that I'd become the kind of drama kid, and just was just a bit always in trouble, not particularly unacademic, but just couldn't concentrate, was never going to make anything, or was just always going to be just distracted. And I can go, I'm sure anyone with ADHD can feel like this, but I can go from being the most productive person one day and feeling really smart and like I'm adding value, to then the next day just feeling totally dumb, and like I'm not adding value at all, and people just don't understand. But also, I had a good childhood, but my dad worked away from home a lot. We lost our house, and there was just a lot that made the environment kind of stable, but also in many other ways I was a bit more receptive than my brother and sister to just a bit of a chaotic environment sometimes. And my mum as well. My mum and dad have neurodiversities themselves, or neurodivergent themselves, but they just both don't want to get diagnosed, but now recognize over the last kind of 18-20 months that the signals and the traits that they have, or they share with me. So my dad's would be have a spectrum of ASD somewhere. He hasn't been assessed, but it's always very emotionally difficult, because he didn't talk a lot about emotions. He would shout a lot, not abusive, but just quite difficult to deal with. And I couldn't shut off those things. And my mum had a lot of mental health issues when she was she was going through a lot that I've only just been able to talk to her as an adult now. And she attempted suicide a couple of times. At the time, I'd found a very good way, like the rest of my family, to just block these things out. But now I've been looking back at it, these things all add up. And I don't feel unlucky, but I just wished there would have been more support then. But also, as I'm sure Kelly has said as well, I've been building environments and managing teams before my diagnosis, and actually not recognizing that I was really not in a great place, and did it the crisis way, sadly, which I don't want for anyone else.
Yeah.
Man, thanks, guys. Yeah, Kelly, you go. Sorry, you go ahead.
Yeah, it's funny. So, you think about sort of some of the non-environmental factors, right? So like premature birth weight, low birth weight. These are some things. There are some studies out there that show you're at higher risk. But if you back into that, what are some of the reasons that people have, you know, premature birth and low birth weight rate. So, you know, things like alcoholism, depression. There's a lot of these social, behavioral, and emotional and mental factors that go into, you know, things like premature birth and low birth weight. So, you know, there's a lot of, you know, head trauma, right? So concussions early on in life. So there's a lot of non-genetic ways in which people can, specifically talking about ADHD. But, you know, like Anthony had mentioned, you know, my background, my mother was bipolar, diagnosed bipolar, severe depression, attempted suicide many times unsuccessfully, was really in a depressed state, very, you know, struggled sort of mentally, even when she was pregnant with all of us. Her father was, you know, an alcoholic, right? So, you know, these familial, what we call legacy traits, whether they are directly or indirectly, they impact the behaviors of generations to come, right? So, you know, there's a lot of that deep-seated legacy trauma that plays into, you know, some of these diagnoses, and certainly whether or not people feel the ability or have the ability to actually themselves go get diagnosed.
Yep, I dig it. I'm glad we've taken the opportunity to kind of talk more about the emotional stuff. And again, I really, really appreciate you guys sharing some of your own personal experiences here, because that makes it all the more real. Being that you're both trying to help move the needle on the future of the workplace, I'm just curious, what tangible steps do you think we can take to give more tools and support to neurodiverse people within the workplace? And like, I'm really asking that question in a very open-ended way, in whatever way you'd like to take it. I'll start with Anthony. I mean, there's obviously many directions we could go with that question.
Yeah, I've got a couple of graphics that I'll just share in the chat in a bit, but because I did have a think about, I thought this question might come up. So having, you know, had to a raw experience of this and how my workplace and my employer is really good, you know, there's a lack of authenticity and a lack of attention paid to what a neuro-inclusive workplace looks like. So to me, given that, you know, there is a ton of research into why it's the right thing to do, and also a ton of research from employers that they just don't feel that they've got the preparedness to do it justice. I would like just a little bit more humanity in it, because I've felt, and I'm pretty senior in my career, but you know, it's broken me, quite honestly, financially, but also emotionally as well. So having to write a list myself of adjustments under the Equality Act here in the UK was a little bit soul destroying, because I still am trying to understand my neurodivergence myself. So actually being expected to always play a work role in, and I'm not alone in this, because I've spoken to a lot of teenagers and people, kind of adults who have gone through the same thing with the Neurodiversity and Business Network. It's nice to know that that isn't just a feeling that I've had as well. So I'd like to see a lot more authentic policy, you know, a lot more general adjustments, rather than, you know, things seen as you know, adjustments that you would make just because, you know, reactive adjustments that aren't a one size fits all, don't look as though, you know, a very kind of willing participant in a manager or whoever has gone and Googled it, and there's nothing wrong with Googling, but it just makes you feel even more abnormal. And actually, you know, the retention is pretty poor. I felt like leaving lots of employers lots of times, less so now because I have a diagnosis, but it's not about the diagnosis, it's actually about the willingness to listen and to encourage an open dialogue. Don't get me wrong, this gets more difficult depending on, you know, which autism, whether it's ASD or whether it's ADHD, or, you know, level with an organization, which I think is really bad as well. So, you know, I would like to see more policy around, you know, the insurance that's offered. I've got US colleagues, and until you need it, you don't check. But actually, I've got LGBTQ plus friends and colleagues who are going through transition or have gone through transition. That doesn't get covered in many insurance. Neither does what they call developmental disorders, which covers quite a lot, if not all, of the neurodivergent categories, really. So employers are willing but slow to act. I'm also not convinced that there's a lot of joined up thinking, and there are a few really good examples of employers starting to do things, mainly in the retail banking space. At Barclays here in the UK have just opened up their friend there just opened up their new office in Glasgow, and it has STEM rooms, it has everything, support, but it only goes so far. Even they challenged themselves, which I found quite refreshing, and said, we're still on a very long road to being a neuro-inclusive employer, because it starts with attracting talent, retaining talent. It's not just about the tangible things. So that's my view.
That was great. Kelly, do you need me to prompt you, or you got any thoughts rolling off the tongue?
I always have thoughts, Dave.
I know you.
Yeah, this gets me really fired up. I think there's, you know, sort of my workplace, I'm doing air quotes here. I spend so much time now in academic institutions that's really where a lot of my focus is. But I think even inside of academic institutions, whether that be K through 12 or higher ed, and even in the general workplace, I think we have so much work to do. I think the buzzword right now is, you know, neurodiversity, neuro-inclusive work environments. And the challenge that I have for a lot of workplaces is you can't, to Anthony's point, yes, you can Google it, but you have to have a real clear understanding of what this actually means. So before you can even begin to roll out policies, procedures, supportive trainings, before you can do any of that information, before you can build an environment, before you can put the right products in there and the right lighting, and before you can do any of that, we have to understand how and what is neurodiversity. What is the scope, breadth, and depth? It's not just one blanket term. Under the umbrella of neurodiversity, you have autism, you have mental health issues, you have ADHD, you have, you know, epilepsy. There's 1,000 different kinds of neurodevelopmental differences that people show up in the world navigating. And so it's not for employers or a school board to diagnose or necessarily, you know, have full support from a therapeutic perspective. But we have to start with growing an awareness, a fundamental baseline awareness of what neurodiversity is, how that brain function is different than a neurotypical human. And then once we get that baseline foundation, only then can we start to build policies, programs, procedures, and then built environments that can actually support people. Because the other thing that I always want to remind people is that while we're all here talking about it, I mean, I'll talk about it until I'm blue in the face, there are still a significant number of humans who are not comfortable sharing, whether they are self-diagnosed or, you know, professionally diagnosed. They are still not comfortable sharing the challenges of their diverse, beautiful brain with their employer or their academic institution, right? They just, you know, so they're struggling in silence because they're navigating a world that was built by and for neurotypical people. And so I think we have to, as a society, start understanding what the baseline foundation is, create these environments based on that understanding, and then be supportive, but we cannot be intrusive either.
Yep, man. You're giving me pause because yeah, thanks for the clap. I always, I come with a structure for these conversations, and I always find all I get out is my first question, and then it's just like, whoa, where am I going to go from here? The thing that, Kelly, you're making me want to like close out with, other than like a little fun question I have at the end, is like, I'm thinking of my own child who, I mean, already is neurodiverse because she's got epilepsy. Yep. And in addition to that, I'm watching her grow up, and I'm already hearing her tell me things like, music has been her favorite thing to do. But as soon as she's gotten into a structured learning environment, all of a sudden gym is her favorite thing because it's the place that she can like move around and be free. And look, she may not have other neurodiversities to her, but my intuition is just telling me something different.
Yeah.
So, you got your kids, I got mine. We all care about the future generation. Like, it gets corny to say this, but it's just like, if we think of a world where like my 5.5-year-old girl is now in the workplace, and like I think of my own experience where it's like I've been self-diagnosing myself and trying to figure out what's going on, and it actually took getting out of that environment entirely to make me realize how much it wasn't working for me.
Yep.
Like, what is the ideal future state here, like 10 years from now? Like, we're just seeming to get to the point of like an understanding of the existence of these issues.
Yeah.
So where are we, I guess, in 10 years? Where do you hope we are, in the workplace?
I mean, I think for me, it would be wonderful if in a very nirvana state where human beings can show up in their lives, whether that is in a work environment or an academic environment, they can show up in their lives just as a human. And that whether they are neurotypical or neurodiverse, it is irrelevant. There is no line in the sand between the two because we have created and fostered an awareness and a built environment that supports a human being in all of the beautiful ways that they show up. And there's so much work that has to happen between now and then. But in a nirvana state, that would be where I would love to see things, is that I could show up as a neurodivergent person, and my husband, who is neurotypical, he can show up and we can both be supported equally in the ways in which we need to navigate that world successfully.
It feels like really like having these kinds of conversations wherever they happen. It's just a huge part of kind of getting there. Anthony, what's your nirvana, dude?
I've just written notes. I was getting, this is my part of my so this is my ADHD coming out, because otherwise I'd just interrupt. So I'm trying not to interrupt. So my nirvana is not having to come out again. That's how it's the best way I can explain it, to be honest. So that's how people in the workplace had asked me some very awkward questions in the past, like that I've seen it happening more than I'd ever seen before with neurodiversity now. People feeling either they can't, explain why they are who they are, and also why should they? So my nirvana is that, akin to what Kelly said, actually, it is not for one single company or policymaker to just wave a magic wand and to just do the perfect right thing. It's going to take a lot of effort and a lot of money, but money well spent, because when recruitment comes up, a renewal, for example, a load of recruiters are used, and one of the things I've been saying at Zero and to many people is, well, there's a really easy thing you can do to attract and retain neurodivergent talent, and that's to authentically choose your partners better. Make better life choices. We don't always do that. I, for one, have made some pretty bad life choices, but work life choices can be structured and are, contract based and all of that good stuff. So I'd also like to see a lot more out of work neuro inclusion as well, because actually that's where my triggers happen most. I live my life very differently. I've always felt different and odd. So, and I'm not alone in that. So, neuro inclusive cities is a big word, but actually, you know, there are towns across that I've visited across the UK, for example, that have, you know, started making changes and having, you know, simple things like, you know, neuro inclusion charts in, you know, big stadiums and in shopping centres. I just didn't expect them to happen in that place first. But often the biggest changes happen not in the workplace, because they're, you know, more consumer led, which is sad, really, because, you know, your workforce are your power. So, you know, people by people. But yeah, I'd like to see a lot more. I keep saying authenticity, but there's a lot of goodwill around. People aren't, you know, they don't try and be discriminatory on purpose. I really believe that, but it just seems to be happening. And it was a term that I'd never heard before, and I've used it more now in, you know, explaining things to bosses and to people in general. Gaslighting. You know, I'd never realized how often I had been gaslit and basically covertly blamed for a situation, or for me being me, and it causing, you know, nobody else taking shared responsibility. So I'd like to, it's going to be tough, and it's going to be like, you know, like anything worth doing, it's going to be a bit awkward for the first few rounds. It's going to feel you know, uncomfortable, but that uncomfortable and that vulnerability, whether, you know, you're the neurodiverse person, neurodivergent person, or actually, you know, everybody should be having that shared feeling of vulnerability, because that, I think, will foster some understanding. But yeah, I hope that made sense.
It does. And you guys are, I consider myself a sensitive soul, and I say that in a complimentary way to myself, and I'm going to say the same for both of you. I think you're both sensitive souls. I'm vibing what you're putting down. Before we get to Q&A, because I know we even have at least one more neurodiverse person in this room. I know there's probably more. It's 15 or 20% of any room. But just out of pure curiosity, I'm wondering how each of you are experiencing this modality as a way of connecting, and how might you see it sort of playing a role in the future, given what we're talking about? Just thought I'd throw that at you. Kelly, curious what your feeling is first.
I have two sides to this coin to answer. Personally, I'm not a technical person. And because of the way my ADHD shows up, I tend to not act until I'm 100% confident that I know what I'm doing. And so for me, a world like this feels a little overwhelming, because I'm not sure, you know, Henry was kind enough to sort of help me navigate sort of how to walk in this environment, right? So I think for someone like myself, this can be a little, I don't want to say it's not a barrier, but this can be a little scary, because it's hard to, if you're not really technical, it's hard to sort of navigate. That being said, once you get past that, I think these kinds of environments, and certainly has been reinforced by my students' perception of these kinds of environments, it really levels the playing field, right? So if you look at the way that your room is set up, Dave, right? You're at a round table. No one is standing at the front of the room pointing. There isn't a head of the table. Everyone is equal participants around the room. You know, Anthony and I aren't sitting on a stage as if we were somehow elevated from everyone else in the audience. No, we are all shoulder to shoulder. And there is a level of equality that happens in a room like this. You can replicate that in real life for sure. But I think in environments like this, it lends itself to a level of equality that, you know, that certainly my students really enjoy.
Yeah, thank you for that. I love that you gave both sides, and both sides are extremely valid. So thanks for sharing that. Anthony, what about you? Is this your first time in an environment like this, or have you done this before?
It's my first time concentrating and being forced in the nicest possible way to, you know, embrace it. And I think it was the right time with everything that's happened in the last, you know, 18 months. So I on paper, I'm technical, Kelly, but even I find it overwhelming. And I was like, oh my God, I can do everything. I can emote. I can do everything. So it's just not just walking. It was like standing still, was the first thing. I think the last time I was in here I got all of it out of my system. So thanks to Mikhail about that, because I was just kind of went in a speedboat and went bonkers. But I totally agree with you. I think a level playing field and being able, an environment where you don't have to, my hair looks bloody awful right now, so I'm quite glad I'm not on camera, but also the ability to demonstrate to employers, to education, to, schools, that there was a horrible thing that my niece texted me today and said that Rishi Sunak, who's our Prime Minister, said something awful today and said the challenges in schools will all be fixed because each student in the next 20 years will have a robot teacher. I was like, that scared the crap out of my niece. Scared the crap out of me, actually. I'm like, how's that going to work? Even less emotional connection. That's great for neurodiversity. But I think environments like this actually don't lose that. And there is an ability to accelerate some change as well, and to demonstrate some of that change. I hate the term kind of pilot or proof of concept, because it just is a catchphrase for just not doing anything or doing something on a really small scale. But actually, it just got me thinking when I first, even being in here now, the technology's come on so far. I think since last time I was in sort of meaningful, work-based metaverse, but it doesn't feel like it anymore. It just feels like a place that you can be calm, that you can share. So I'm quite encouraged by that. I think there's a lot more. It takes a lot more to build a new building, or to see changes and adjustments in the workplaces too big and too soon. Whereas actually this just demonstrates there are a lot more options that employers just aren't taking account of. But yeah.
Well, that was great, and I can echo your sentiment on like just being able to physically show up as you are that day, or even literally from a comfort level perspective. Like, I've had times where I've gotten hot and, like, not gonna lie, taking my shirt off. It's no offense to anybody else, you know what I mean? Like, but of course that's not socially acceptable, nor would I do something like that in an in-person environment or on a Zoom call. So it actually presents these interesting opportunities for people to be comfortable in their own way. And then for me, even as a moderator here, I get quite fidgety all the time, and I struggle to, like, sit still and, like, carry the conversation. But in this mode, I can actually be what my body needs to be in that moment, where I might feel physically kind of awkward that in an in-person setting or on Zoom. So that's just my personal experience on it. Anyway, guys, thank you very much for this conversation. It was better and more interesting than I even would have thought it would have been. I would love to, like, clap first. I can't clap because I'm on a weird streaming thing, but thank you, everybody. And I would love to just open it up to anybody who wants to share anything they want to share. Pick on someone like Glenn or Henry. I know you've got something.
I've got something. I wanted to pick up on kind of the vulnerability that we were talking about throughout. And I really appreciate the kind of sharing of your beginner's mind experiences with Kelly and Anthony coming in here. There definitely is kind of a vulnerability in that overwhelming feeling of being in worlds like this. And we're kind of talking about the uncomfortableness of coming out in whatever way as well, which I'll just say I definitely feel that too. I'm not ready to share more than that, but I think it is important and a very hard thing to get used to, or not used to, because you don't want it to be that way all the time, but be able to manage through that uncomfortableness. And I've done that my whole life and career as someone different in many ways. And I was also glad to hear you mention feeling of equality and comfortableness, because I definitely feel that here, whether it's the clothing I wear now. I definitely resonated with a piece Kelly wrote lately, and part of it just the sensitivities of being out in the world and wearing business clothes and all of that. was a huge challenge, I realize, in hindsight for me. And to now be able to be more comfortable, it helps me be more confident and things like that. So anyway, just talking about vulnerability, and I appreciate your perspectives and everything you shared here today.
Thank you for that, Sarah. I appreciate you saying that too. Anybody else got something on their mind?
I do, sir. Hi, my name's Jacob. I'm I'm an XR developer and IT support, and I have HFAASD ADD. I guess I don't like to. I just say I have like Asperger's just because it's easier to put those. And I just wanted to say that a lot of times when I come to Verbella, I do find people that resonate with a lot of my own experiences, and I've definitely witnessed that today. And it's funny because of the fact that I grew up like very, very impoverished and did not have benefits like to get to have the health care to go get checked. But I was diagnosed with ADHD, and I'm a late diagnosis. So I guess I just wanted to say that that it's interesting that those things can resonate so far and reverberate across multiple lines of society, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I just and I as someone who is working very hard to be a burgeoning talent, part of my mission is to use at some point is to use virtual reality to be able to help people to build those bridges, because it's really, it can be really difficult just to even go like to the grocery store. You have to like condition yourself to be able to go.
Right?
And so and so I'm seeing tech now that, like, I saw this thing the other day where it makes it to where when you go to the grocery store, it's like a game.
Yeah.
And if that was modified to where it could block out senses or lower the lights and make all those modifications and give the user an experience they can focus on, so I guess I just wanted to touch on some of the things that were discussed. And just I really appreciate everyone, the host being so open. And one question I have, I guess, is what are some things in the future that you think that we can do to spread more awareness and to be more effective? Because I'll tell you, this past year, I've had several interviews in which it was not neurodiverse at all. And then I've had some that they didn't even know, and it was. And then I had one that recently that I thought it was, but I think I might have been gaslit. I don't know. And so I'm just, I try to, and for me personally, it's hard for me to be this open, but it's easier here. And so, I was showing this recent portfolio I built that was like really dynamic, for instance, and I bring a trifecta of 3D modeling, XR development, and tech support. And so I felt like I brought a lot to the table in the interview, but at the end, I was really confused whether a second interview was going to happen or not, because he acted, you know what I mean? So it was like because as soon as I told him I had Asperger's, he had this like look on his face. I don't know if it was like, I couldn't tell if it was just, oh, that's why you have all of this, you're so dedicated, or if it was like an alarm going off, right? I didn't know if it was a positive or a negative. So I guess I just wanted to bring to say those things and ask what we can do to try to change the time for people, because there's a lot of people in tech and a lot of other areas that socially they may not be as adept or as normalized, but they have burgeoning talents that can be really beneficial. So I want to know how we can like change that. So
I mean, I'll jump in because I'm gonna. I think it starts with advocacy and education, and I think you're spot on that there's still such bias, and a lot of times we'll say that we are inclusive or that we're trying to be inclusive, but the minute you announce, project, or pronounce what you need or what you are, or it doesn't matter, just what the person that you're speaking to, oftentimes their own bias is going to come to the table. We see this all the time in education, right? And I'm an educator, so I'm not bashing educators, but I can't tell you the number of times where I've sat across the table from an educator and I've said to them, my son has dyslexia. He cannot read. You cannot teach him the way that you're teaching the other 24 kids in your classroom. He requires different learning. He's not stupid. He's none of those other negative things. And you see the look on their face like, holy shit, I've got this problem child that I now have to somehow modify how I'm teaching. Now, how do you fix that? That same scenario, to your point, happens in the workplace. How do you change that? You change that by educating people. What are the strengths? What are the weaknesses? People who are neurodivergent, their brains are just wired differently. They are just as beautiful. Their brains function just as optimally as someone who is neurotypical. It just means that they require different things to be successful. That's it. One person likes to drive a Yugo and the other one likes to drive a Mercedes. Guess what? They both go to the same friggin' place. They just require different things. So I think it starts with educating everyone. You have to start with that educational piece, but then in the workplace, it absolutely has to start at the foundation. So job descriptions, be really, really crystal clear. How are you putting those job descriptions together? How are you conducting your interviews? What questions are you conducting? So if you're using AI and you're thinking you're really progressive in using AI in your process, that might actually be counterintuitive to someone who is neurodivergent who can't access AI, right? So we have to be really mindful about just even the entire workflow for employees and employers, right down to the foundational first job description.
These are just some flamethrowers from Jacob.
Sorry.
And
Sorry, I get very fired up about this.
No,
Never
I
apologize for it.
Something
Don't
I wanted
apologize.
to say is that it's interesting you say that because I didn't have those advantages. I was lucky enough to have like a neurodivergent mom that didn't know, like she taught handicapped kids. Like that was her whole life. And so I was homeschooled for a little while. So I had some advantages and I've always been precocious. Like I've always been curious. So I had some advantages to be able and resilient. So I've had some advantages to be able to be like, okay, well, this model isn't working for me. It might take me a little more time, but I'm going to create my own curriculum. I'm going to create my own way of learning and viewing it a different way, because often I found as a developer, especially, and just building that career and just being polymathic, I guess, is that when we see problems, they're just opportunities for creativity, for creative solutions. And so I've tried to do that in my own like day to day. For instance, I'm learning all those things that I mentioned, but I couldn't understand how to use like a creative editor tool because I had an IT background, collar environment, right? And so I said, well, I tried it the regular way, it didn't work. I needed something tactile. I wanted to get to the base mesh level and understand like topology and understand just how to use a design program, right? And so I started to use like a 3D modeler on my iPad. And then I was getting the code that I was learning, but I wasn't understanding how to use this other thing that I had never used. And by almost reverse engineering my own learning processes, it made it's like now universally I can get on any editor and I can make myself comfortable because I just had to find my own way of learning it. And so I'm hoping that especially as people that are trying to make an impact, whether it be now or you're building skills to do that later, it's really like some of the things we're discussing are really important because there's people out there that they have a lot of skills themselves, but they don't have that level of adaptability because they haven't had to use it, right? So we have to create those solutions so that they don't have to and build those bridges. So,
well, it's not even that they haven't had to use it. A lot of times the environments with which they're navigating aren't conducive to be able to foster that. So, I mean, if we look at our next generation again, I'm harping on education. I love education. So please, no disrespect. But if we look at the educational environments, K through 12 and higher ed, pre-kindergarten, how do children learn? Just fundamentally take away the bias. You look at a preschool classroom, there's manipulatives, there's reading areas, they're getting outside, right? Children are learning by using all of their senses. And then someone, certainly in the US, in their infinite, stupidity, as I will call it that, they've decided that, no, we're going to sit kids in rows in hard furniture that they can't move in, that's uncomfortable, they're literally sitting in essentially prison cells that may or may not have windows that open 2 inches. And they get access to, 20 minutes of gym time. They've removed all of the arts, all of the creative modalities by which those students who would use to be able to get that innovation out and to be able to learn these skills, to be able to navigate innovation. We've removed them from the education system. And then we show up in environments like this and we say, well, why is our next generation demanding, why are they not showing up the way that we need them to show up? Well, because we've just programmed them for the last 12 years to sit still, shut up, and take orders. Like, it's absurd to me. Our educational environment and the environment by which we are training our next generation to be thinking and feeling and doing and learning and innovating, we have to create environments that foster that.
Man, preach. Look, I gotta cut us off here. I wish I didn't have to, but I want to respect the fact that some people have places to go. This has been incredible. Thank you guys so much. I would love it if we could pop to the front quickly and take a photo. And I feel like we need to digest this conversation a little bit more and maybe revisit even another session on this topic, broadly speaking, because there's so much here to pull on. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
thank you.
That was incredible, guys. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone. All
To
right.
call out to Jacob specifically, like, Jacob, thank you, man, for saying everything you just said there. Like, we're trying to create a place where people can say that shit. So thank you.
My pleasure. It's not easy, but like if you got to stand for something, and or you fall for anything. So, but yeah, I just think it's just important. So it's important to have purpose. So thank you.
Oh, 100%.
It was great to hear all this said out loud.
And I don't know if Sarah, could someone on the Vibrella team grab a photo? Is that possible?
Sure, of course.
Thank you, guys.
Get lined up here.
Feel free to come and stand and show up however you are able to or want to.
Yeah, let's have this be the start of this conversation, living conversation. It was really cool to just hear some of these things said out loud in a room full of people. I know for me, that was something I needed. So thank you all for that.
Sure.
Get this. Robert, my darling, can you turn around for me, sir? You're in body. Otherwise, I'll just get the back. These are, can you come in a little bit more towards that? Oh, there you go. Awesome, Robert. And then for those that are new, you can use the emote panel, which is the little clapping hands or the dancing person on the right. And if you wanted to, we could do a little emote on 3. Wave is an easy one with 1 key shortcut as well. So I'll give you a second or 2 to find your favorite emote, and then on 3. 1,
How do I
2,
put my arm around Dave?
Experiment.
gotta be-
Okay, let's try one more. Just keep emoting, people. I'm just gonna be rolling the shutter here, but thank you, and thanks to the Inspired People, Inspired Places team, Dave, John, Chris, everybody. Thanks.
Thanks you.
All right.
Thanks
Thank
so
you.
much, everybody.
Take care.